Imagine a world where the global financial system is held together by a fragile truce. A world where nations stockpile gold not just as an asset, but as a shield. Now imagine the sound of that truce shattering. In the pre-dawn hours of January 3rd, 2026, under the cloak of darkness over Caracas, that's exactly what happened. In a stunning military operation codenamed Absolute Resolve, U.S. Special Forces didn't just cross a border. They crossed a red line that could plunge the world into economic chaos. Their target was the Miraflores Palace. The objective: the capture of a sitting head of state, President Nicolás Maduro. But this wasn't any ordinary arrest. As the world woke up to the shocking news, it became clear the real prize wasn't the man, but what he controlled. A vault deep beneath the city, holding 161 metric tons of solid gold. This act of aggression wasn't just a message to Venezuela. It was a direct challenge to the two global powers who have long considered the nation under their protection: Russia and China. This isn't just a story about a regional conflict. It's about the capture of a president for his $22 billion gold vault, an event that triggers a direct showdown between superpowers and threatens to bring down the entire global financial order. Over the next few minutes, we're going to break down how this unprecedented move, designed to secure America's economic dominance, might be the very thing that ends it forever. To get why the United States would risk a global throwdown for $22 billion in gold, you first have to understand Venezuela's uniquely desperate situation. The nation sits on top of the world's largest proven oil reserves, a sea of black gold that should have made it one of the wealthiest countries on Earth. For decades, it was a major oil supplier to the United States. But a quarter century of mismanagement, corruption, and crippling international sanctions have left its oil industry in ruins. Production has cratered from a peak of 3.5 million barrels per day to under 1 million, a shadow of its former self. The infrastructure is so badly broken that experts say it would take over $100 billion and at least a decade of work to restore it. For a regime choked by sanctions, oil became a liability. It's hard to extract, expensive to refine, and nearly impossible to sell on a global market where the US dollar is king and its sanctions are law. Since 2017, the United States has been systematically tightening the screws, sanctioning individuals, businesses, and the state-run oil company PDVSA. The stated goal was to stop the regime from profiting from oil sales and what the U.S. called criminal activity. These moves effectively walled Venezuela off from the U.S. financial system, the lifeblood of global trade. And that's where the gold comes in. While the oil fields decayed, another asset was waiting: 161 metric tons of gold bars held by the central bank. In a world of digital money and complex finance, gold is brutally simple. It's physical, it's universally valued, and most importantly, it can be moved and traded outside the tightly controlled SWIFT banking system. For Venezuela, this gold was a critical economic escape hatch, a source of instant cash to get around sanctions. While the oil was a long-term, expensive promise, the gold was a $22 billion lifeline, ready to be used as collateral or sold to friendly nations. Every time the price of gold ticked up, that lifeline got more valuable. With a reserve of over 5 million ounces, every $100 price jump adds more than $500 million to the vault's value. This wasn't just a pile of metal. It was a strategic financial weapon, and the one asset Washington couldn't fully control with sanctions alone. The U.S. officially said sanctions were meant to stop illegal gold mining and crime. But for years, as the economic pressure cooker was turned up, that vault of gold sat as a symbol of defiance. It was a treasure chest that let the government cling to power, infuriating policymakers in Washington. The grudge was clear. As long as that gold existed, the sanctions had a hole in them. The only way to truly cut off the regime wasn't just to sanction the gold, but to seize it. The raid on Miraflores Palace wasn't just a random act of aggression. It was the logical, if terrifying, next step in a strategy that's been decades in the making: the weaponization of the U.S. dollar. Think about it. Since the end of World War II, the dollar has been the world's main reserve currency. It's more than just paper money. It's the default language of international trade, the very foundation of global finance. The huge majority of international deals, from buying oil to paying off debt, are priced and settled in dollars. This gives the United States a unique and incredible power, because most global money flows have to pass through the U.S. financial system. Washington can cut entire nations off from the world economy with the flick of a switch, and America hasn't been shy about using this power. Sanctions against Iran, North Korea, and Russia have shown just how devastating this economic warfare can be. By freezing assets and blocking access to U.S. markets, Washington can cripple a country's economy without firing a shot. The sanctions on Venezuela since 2017 were a textbook case. They hit individuals, the state oil company, and even the country's ability to issue new debt. But Venezuela exposed a crack in this strategy. While sanctions could paralyze the country's formal economy, they couldn't stop the flow of physical stuff, like gold. This is why Operation Absolute Resolve is such a massive shift. It's a move from financial exclusion to physical seizure. The operation seems to be the birth of what some are already calling the Monroe Doctrine, a mashup of the old Monroe Doctrine, which rejected foreign meddling in the Americas, and the aggressive, go-it-alone style of the Trump administration. This new doctrine suggests the U.S. is now willing to use direct military force to protect its economic turf and block rivals like China and Russia from its backyard. After the raid, a statement from President Trump was shockingly blunt. He said the U.S. would run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition, and that American oil companies would be brought in to take over and sell Venezuelan oil. This wasn't spun as liberation. It sounded like a hostile takeover. Legal experts and watchdog groups like WOLA and Chatham House immediately slammed the operation as a blatant violation of international law and the U.S. Constitution's rules on war powers, saying it had no justification of self-defense. It was, they argued, an extrajudicial abduction of a head of state, done without any approval from Congress. But for the architects of this new doctrine, the law seemed to be an afterthought. The strategic goal was everything, showing that no asset anywhere in the world is beyond the reach of American power. The message was unmistakable. If sanctions don't work, boots on the ground will. This escalation raises a huge question for every country out there. What happens when financial weapons aren't enough? And if a country's own reserves can be physically snatched, what does that mean for the future of global money? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and this is a conversation we all need to have. The shockwaves from the Caracas raid hit Moscow and Beijing almost instantly. For years, Russia and China have been Venezuela's main international backers, forming a critical alliance against American influence in Latin America. Their support has been a mix of economic lifelines and strategic chess moves. China, for example, has loaned Venezuela over $62 billion since 2005, with most of it being paid back in oil. As the country's single biggest customer, China buys up to 80–85% of all Venezuelan oil, making it an economic partner they simply can't do without. Russia's role is just as crucial, but with more of a military flavor. Moscow has sold Venezuela major military hardware and has built a close strategic partnership. This alliance does two things for Russia. It gives them a geopolitical foothold in the Western Hemisphere, a direct jab at American influence, and it secures access to Venezuela's massive energy reserves for Russian state companies like Rosneft. There were even talks about Russia getting access to a military base on La Orquilla Island, which would give Moscow a forward operating base just a hop, skip, and a jump from the U.S. mainland. Both Russia and China have consistently used their veto power at the UN Security Council to protect the Maduro government from international pressure, calling U.S. sanctions illegal. So the American operation wasn't just an attack on Caracas. It was a direct punch to the strategic gut of Moscow and Beijing. The response was immediate and furious. The Russian Foreign Ministry warned that Washington's actions could have serious consequences and reaffirmed its full support for Venezuela's leadership, which now falls to acting President Delcy Rodriguez, who called the U.S. action a kidnapping. China's foreign ministry was just as angry, stating that Beijing opposes all unilateral and illegal sanctions. But behind the tough diplomatic talk is a cold, hard reality. The seizure of Venezuela is a direct threat to their investments and a bold attempt to wipe their influence off the map in the region. It proves what they've feared all along, that the U.S. will use its military and economic might to get what it wants. International rules be damned. This forces their hand. For years, Russia and China have been pushing a global trend called de-dollarization, a slow but steady effort to chip away at the world's dependence on the U.S. dollar. They've been bulking up their gold reserves, making trade deals in their own currencies, and building alternative payment systems to get around SWIFT. The raid on Venezuela is the ultimate "I told you so." It proves that any country tied to the dollar-based system is vulnerable. The dragon and the bear now have to choose. Either bow down to this new American unilateralism or hit the gas on building a parallel financial system, one that's immune to Washington's control. The showdown is no longer just a theory. It's here. The second that news of Operation Absolute Resolve hit the markets, panic went global. The first and biggest reaction was the price of gold. The precious metal, the ultimate safe haven in a crisis, shot up over 2%, climbing to a near-record price of over $400 per ounce. This wasn't just traders chasing a headline. It was a deep, fundamental rethinking of risk. Seizing a nation's sovereign gold reserves sent a terrifying message to central banks everywhere. Your assets aren't safe. For countries that keep their gold in vaults in New York or London, a very common practice, a horrifying question popped up. Could we be next? This fear was like pouring gasoline on the de-dollarization fire. The idea of ditching the dollar, once a slow-moving academic debate, was now an urgent, flashing red priority. Nations like China, Russia, and India were already leading this charge, swapping their dollar reserves for gold and setting up ways to trade in their own currencies. The Venezuela raid is the very thing that could turn this slow trickle into a flood. If holding dollars means you're subject to the whims of American foreign policy, then the only smart move is to find an exit. In a strange twist, the oil markets went the other way. Brent crude, the global benchmark, actually dipped by 1.3% to around $56 a barrel. This weird move was driven by two things. First, the global oil market was already drowning in supply, with the International Energy Agency predicting a surplus of 3.8 million barrels per day in 2026. Second, Venezuela's current oil output is so tiny, less than 1% of global production, that taking it offline for a bit barely makes a dent. The market seems to be betting that even with the U.S. in charge, fixing Venezuela's oil industry will be a long, hard, and expensive road that needs stability, and that massive $100 billion investment. This creates a stunning contrast. The immediate, touchable value of $22 billion in gold versus the far-off, hypothetical value of oil. The U.S. might have grabbed control of the world's biggest oil reserves, but it did it by shattering the trust that holds up the dollar's global empire. The instant cash from the gold is pocket change compared to the potential long-term strategic loss. The shockwave isn't about the supply of oil or gold. It's about the supply of trust in the global financial system. And that's one commodity that, once it's gone, is almost impossible to get back. The financial world is now bracing for a new era of instability, one where weaponizing the dollar has finally triggered a powerful and unpredictable backlash. The dust from Operation Absolute Resolve hasn't even settled, but we can already see the outlines of a new, more broken world taking shape. The United States has made a gutsy play, grabbing a tangible asset worth $22 billion while also claiming control over the world's biggest oil reserves. It's a move that perfectly captures the Monroe Doctrine, an assertion of absolute power in its own hemisphere. In a TV address, Secretary of State Marco Rubio drew a hard red line, warning that Venezuela would no longer be a strategic playground for Russia or China, stating flatly, "They aren't even on this continent." The message is a clear return to a more aggressive, in-your-face regional policy. But this short-term win could come with an unbearable long-term price tag. The capture of Maduro and the seizure of Venezuela's gold has supercharged the global de-dollarization movement in a way that years of sanctions never could. The trend away from the dollar has been happening since the 2008 financial crisis, with countries like Russia and China trying to insulate themselves from U.S. policy. But now, the threat isn't just a theory. Physically seizing a country's sovereign assets crosses a major line. Central banks in countries that aren't tight U.S. allies now have to see their dollars and their gold held overseas not as assets, but as potential hostages. Moving into other currencies, bringing gold home, and using alternative systems like the one proposed by BRICS is no longer a policy choice. It's a matter of national security. The great irony here is the difference between the two assets at the heart of this crisis, the gold and the oil. The gold was the quick score, the instant prize. But the oil, the real source of Venezuela's potential wealth, is still just a distant dream. Reviving the nation's badly broken infrastructure needs a decade of peace and a staggering $100 billion investment. American oil companies like Chevron, ConocoPhillips, and ExxonMobil, who all have claims against Venezuela, might be ready to invest, but they'll need a stable political scene that is anything but guaranteed. In the short term, Venezuelan oil production is expected to stay flat, having almost no impact on global prices. This all leads to the ultimate question. Has the United States just won a battle but lost the war? It has flexed its muscles in a spectacular way, reminding everyone of its long history of intervention in Latin America, from Chile in 1973 to Panama in 1989. Yet in doing so, it has sledgehammered the very foundation of its global economic power: trust. The dollar's dominance was never just about military might. It was built on the idea that it was a stable, reliable, and mostly neutral way to do business. By treating another nation's reserves as spoils of war, America has sent a message that the old rules are out the window. Now the world watches and waits. Will this gamble pay off? Will the U.S. manage to rebuild Venezuela's oil industry and secure its own energy future? Or will the backlash from Russia, China, and a long line of nervous nations permanently knock the dollar off its throne as the world's reserve currency? The future of the global financial system might just be decided by the answer to one single, lingering question. The United States has seized the gold, but in the process, has it lost the world? If you want to understand the deeper mechanics of how geopolitics is rewriting the rules of finance, you should check out our video on the rise of alternative payment networks. The link is on your screen now. And as always, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss our analysis of the events shaping our world.